The phone vibrated against Marcus Chen's hip at 2:47 p.m., the digital chirp slicing through the mechanical hum of Tower B's basement. His hands were buried in the guts of the HVAC system, fingers black with grease when the screen lit up with the school's number. Third time this month, he knew before answering. The nurse's voice carried that practiced calm that always preceded bad news. Ryan had another episode. The inhaler worked but barely. "Come pick him up, please, Mr. Chen, soon as you can." Marcus wiped his palm on his coveralls and checked the wall clock. 3 hours left on shift. Brad had been clear last week after the dentist appointment, after the parent-teacher conference that ran long. "One more early departure and we'll have to discuss your commitment to the team." Corporate speak for the third warning, the one that came with a pink slip and no severance. The pressure gauge on the pipe assembly stared back at him, needle-kissing the edge of the red zone. He'd flagged this system in October, then November. December's report went ignored like the others. The metal beneath his palm thrummed with heat. It shouldn't carry decades of corrosion eating through walls meant to contain forces that could shred flesh from bone. His phone buzzed again. A text this time, nurse's number. Ryan asking for him. Marcus closed his eyes and saw Jennifer's hospital room that last afternoon, when the morphine couldn't touch the pain anymore. Her hand in his paper-thin skin over bird bones, and those final words that had become his North Star. "Promise me you'll take care of our boy, no matter what." He'd held her until her breathing stopped, until the monitors went flat, until the nurses gently pulled him away. 3 years ago this February. Ryan had been 5 too young to understand why Mommy stopped coming home old enough to know the world had broken in half. The mechanical room door banged open. Brad stepped through, clipboard in hand, that middle management smirk already in place. Marcus had seen that expression before, usually right before someone got thrown under a bus to protect quarterly numbers. "Got the Tower B inspection form here, Chen. Just need your signature. All systems nominal, right?" Marcus straightened, vertebrae cracking from the crouch. The pressure gauge sat between them like evidence at a crime scene. The pipes behind it told a story in rust, in metal fatigue, a narrative any first-year maintenance tech could read. This system was a disaster waiting for an invitation. The words came out flat. "No. Pipes need full replacement. Pressure's running critical. I've reported this 7 times. Brad's smile never wavered, but something cold moved behind his eyes. "Budget's frozen until Q2. Hartfield Jr.'s orders. Sign it anyway." The air between them thickened. Marcus had spent 8 years in the Navy, 4 deployments on carrier engine rooms, where a missed inspection could sink a ship and kill 3,000 souls. He understood the weight of a signature, the responsibility that came with putting your name on a document that said safe when the reality was anything but. His phone buzzed a third time, probably the school again, or maybe the pharmacy. The automated reminder that Ryan's prescription was ready, the one that insurance had denied last week. $400 for albuterol, the medication that kept his son's airways open when the asthma tried to close them. His checking account held $287 until Friday's direct deposit. Brad's voice dropped lower, almost gentle. "Your call, Marcus, but you know what 3 warnings means. And I gotta ask, how's that kid of yours doing, Ryan, right? Heard he's had some health issues." The threat landed with surgical precision. Marcus felt it in his gut, that sick understanding that this wasn't about building safety or maintenance protocols. This was about control, about keeping quiet, about understanding your place in the food chain and knowing when to swallow your objections along with your pride. The clipboard appeared in Brad's outstretched hand. The form on top showed Tower B's mechanical systems, neat checkboxes down the left margin, a blank signature line at the bottom. Marcus took it, the metal cold against his palm. His hand moved before his brain could override it, muscle memory, from 1,000 forms signed in 1,000 equipment bays. The pen scratched across paper. His name appeared in blue ink, the letters steady despite the tremor starting in his fingers. Brad's smile widened. Smart man. He plucked the clipboard back and disappeared through the door, footsteps echoing up the concrete stairwell. Marcus stood alone in the mechanical room, surrounded by machines that hummed and clicked and slowly fell apart. The pressure gauge needle had crept another hair toward the danger zone. Somewhere 16 floors above, people sat at desks and typed emails and drank coffee, completely unaware that the air conditioning keeping them comfortable was running on borrowed time and falsified paperwork. He pulled out his phone and called the school. The nurse answered on the first ring, her relief audible. Ryan would be ready at the front office. Jennifer's photo smiled at him from his phone's wallpaper, taken on their honeymoon in the Poconos, her dark hair wild in the wind, joy written across every line of her face. What would she think of him now? Of the man who just signed away his integrity to keep a paycheck? The voice in his head sounded like hers, though maybe it was just his conscience wearing her face. Some things you can't walk away from, Marcus. Some choices follow you forever. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the stairs, leaving the mechanical room and its secrets behind. The door lock clicked with a finality that felt like punctuation on a sentence he couldn't take back. Traffic on the Cross Bronx moved like congealed blood brake lights, stretching to the horizon under a sky the color of old concrete. Marcus drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, watching the minutes tick past. The school day ended at 3:30. He'd be there by 3:40 if the jam cleared. If it didn't, Ryan would wait in the office watching other kids get picked up on time by parents who hadn't compromised their principles before lunch. The radio offered up news between commercial breaks. Something about the mayor's infrastructure plan, another story about construction delays on the 2nd Avenue subway. Marcus barely listened. His mind kept circling back to that signature, to Brad's casual threat, to the way the system groaned under pressure it wasn't designed to handle. Queens materialized through the windshield, that familiar landscape of row houses and corner bodegas. Ryan's school sat on a quiet street lined with London planes, their bark mottled like camouflage. Marcus pulled into the circular drive at 3:43 p.m., cut the engine, and jogged toward the entrance. The front office smelled like pencil shavings and institutional cleaning products. Ryan sat on the vinyl bench next to the nurse's station, his Spider-Man backpack clutched to his chest, eyes tracking the second hand on the wall clock. When he saw Marcus, his face split into a grin that could break hearts. "Dad." His voice carried that 8-year-old enthusiasm that hadn't yet learned to be embarrassed by displays of affection. Marcus scooped him up, felt the solid weight of his son in his arms, the steady thump of his heartbeat against his chest. The nurse handed over a packet of paperwork. He had a moderate attack during recess. "We administered his emergency inhaler as per the care plan. He should be monitored tonight, and you'll need to refill his prescription. The school's supply is running low." Marcus nodded, signed the forms, and carried Ryan toward the exit. In the parking lot, late afternoon sun painted everything amber and gold. Ryan's hand found his as they walked, small fingers threading through larger ones. Inside the truck, Ryan buckled himself in with the careful precision of a child who'd been lectured about safety one too many times. Marcus pulled back onto the street, pointing them toward home. The silence stretched comfortable for a few blocks before Ryan's voice broke it. "Dad, what does doing the right thing mean?" The question landed like a punch to the solar plexus. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, watching brake lights flare ahead. His throat felt tight. "It means being honest, even when it's hard." Ryan nodded, processing this with the seriousness he brought to all questions about how the world worked. "Like when I told Ms. Patterson I broke the crayon, exactly like that, buddy." The lie tasted like copper in Marcus's mouth. He'd just done the opposite of what he was teaching his son, had looked at a dangerous situation and certified it safe because telling the truth cost too much. What kind of father preached integrity while practicing cowardice? They stopped at Walgreens on the way home. The parking lot was half full, people making their way through the automatic doors in that end-of-day shuffle. Marcus held Ryan's hand as they navigated the aisles past vitamin displays and greeting cards to the pharmacy counter at the back. The pharmacist was new, younger than Marcus, with the kind of optimistic energy that suggested she hadn't been in the job long enough to get worn down by insurance companies and prior authorizations. She typed Ryan's information into her system, frowned at the screen, typed more. "Okay, so the albuterol inhaler is ready. That'll be $397.50. Marcus handed over his debit card, watched her slide it through the reader. The machine beeped. The pharmacist's expression shifted from professional courtesy to something more awkward. "I'm sorry, it's declining. Do you have another card?" Ryan was watching now, his dark eyes moving between the pharmacist and his father. Marcus felt heat crawl up his neck. He knew exactly what the account balance was, had known this moment was coming, had hoped maybe there'd be a miracle or an accounting error in his favor. "Can you hold it? I'll come back Friday when I get paid." The pharmacist nodded, already setting the white paper bag aside. "Of course. We'll hold it for 48 hours. Outside, the sun had dropped lower, throwing long shadows across the parking lot. Ryan's hand felt very small in his. The boy hadn't said anything since the declined card, but his breathing had taken on that slight wheeze that preceded trouble. Marcus made a mental note to check how much was left in the emergency inhaler at home. His phone rang before they reached the truck. Tommy O'Brien's name lit up the screen. Tommy was 55, had been maintaining buildings when Marcus was in elementary school, moved through the world with the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen every problem twice and knew solutions that weren't in any manual. Marcus answered. Tommy's gravelly voice came through rough from decades of cigarettes he'd finally quit 5 years back. "Hey kid, you got time for a quick stop? Got something for you." They met at Tommy's apartment in Astoria, a rent-controlled third-floor walk-up with a view of the elevated tracks. Tommy answered the door in his usual uniform of flannel and denim, waved them inside. The place smelled like coffee and old paper walls covered in framed photos from 3 decades of job sites. Ryan immediately gravitated toward Tommy's bookshelf, which held an impressive collection of science fiction paperbacks and a model aircraft carrier Tommy had built from a kit. Tommy ruffled the kid's hair before turning to Marcus. "Heard about the pharmacy thing?" His voice carried no judgment, just a blunt statement of fact. "Here." He pressed $400 bills into Marcus's palm. "Get the kid his medicine. Pay me back Friday." Marcus started to object, but Tommy held up a hand. "Been there, brother. Medical bills from Jean's cancer damn near bankrupted me. We take care of our own." The words lodged in Marcus's throat, gratitude and shame mixing into something that made speech difficult. He managed a nod. Ryan was absorbed in examining the model carrier, his finger tracing the tiny aircraft on the deck. Tommy leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "So Brad made you sign that Tower B inspection?" Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "How'd you know?" "Because he tried the same thing with me last month on Tower A. Told him to go to hell. But I got 28 years in. You got what, 3? And a kid who needs insurance." The understanding in Tommy's voice somehow made it worse. Marcus stared at the worn linoleum floor. "I reported those pipes 7 times. Nobody listened. Nobody ever does until something breaks." Tommy's expression was grim. Hartfield Jr. cut the maintenance budget by 40% when he took over operations. Trying to impress Daddy, boost the profit margins. But buildings don't care about spreadsheets. They just fall apart. They left 20 minutes later, Jian clutching a used paperback about space exploration that Tommy had pressed into his hands. The drive home took them through neighborhoods Marcus had known all his life. Streets where he'd played as a kid, where he'd brought Jennifer after they got married, where they'd pushed Ryan in a stroller through summer evenings that felt like they'd last forever. Their apartment occupied the second floor of a brick building that had seen better decades. 2 bedrooms, kitchen that barely fit a table bathroom with tiles from the 70s. But the rent was manageable and the landlord fixed things when they broke. Marcus had learned to call it home, even though every corner held memories of Jennifer, of the life they'd been building before cancer stole the blueprints. Ryan's inhaler had enough medication for maybe one more episode. Marcus made mac and cheese for dinner, the kind from the box that Ryan loved and nutritionists condemned. They ate in front of the TV some animated movie about talking cars that Ryan had seen a dozen times but still laughed at all the same jokes. At 8:30, Marcus supervised toothbrushing and pajama donning, read 3 chapters of the space book Tommy had given them, and tucked Ryan into bed beneath sheets covered in planets and rockets. The boy's eyes were already heavy, his breathing steady and clear. "Love you, Dad." The words were soft, slurred with approaching sleep. "Love you too, buddy. Sleep tight." Marcus stood in the doorway for a moment, watching his son's chest rise and fall, listening to the gentle sound of air moving through healthy lungs. This was the center of everything, this 8-year-old boy who still believed his father was infallible, who drew pictures of them as superheroes, who hadn't yet learned that sometimes adults made choices they'd have to live with forever. In the living room, Marcus collapsed onto the couch and turned on the news. The local anchor was mid-sentence about a story that made his blood stop moving. "Breaking news tonight from Lower Manhattan, where the body of building inspector Robert Caldwell was found in his vehicle earlier today. Police are investigating what they're calling a possible suicide, though sources say Caldwell had recently been cooperating with investigators looking into alleged violations at several commercial properties. The screen showed yellow crime scene tape, official vehicles with lights flashing, a black body bag being loaded into a coroner's van. Marcus felt ice water replace the blood in his veins. Caldwell. He'd met him twice, once during a routine inspection, once when the inspector had pulled him aside and asked questions about maintenance protocols at Hartfield Properties. That had been maybe 6 weeks ago. The guy had seemed solid professional, asked the right questions. Now he was dead, possibly suicide. But the timing, the mention of an investigation, the cooperating with investigators detail, all of it pointed in directions that made Marcus's skin crawl. He sat in the darkened living room long after the news moved on to other stories. His signature on that inspection form felt like it was burning through his pocket, like evidence of complicity in something larger than a falsified document. Outside, the city hummed its endless song, millions of lives intersecting and diverging, each person carrying their own load of choices and consequences. Sleep came in fragments, dreams of pressure gauges and collapsing buildings, of Jennifer's face asking him what happened to the man she married. He woke at 5:47 a.m. to his alarm's insistent beeping, stumbled to the shower, let hot water run over him until the tank ran cold. By 6:30, he was back at Hartfield Tower, swiping his ID card through the employee entrance, nodding to the overnight security guard who was ending his shift. The building rose above him, 42 stories of steel and glass in concrete, home to law firms and consulting agencies and financial services companies. A monument to modern commerce built on the backs of people like Marcus, who kept the machinery running and kept their mouths shut when inconvenient truths surfaced. The mechanical room waited in the basement, familiar and treacherous. Marcus was logging pressure readings on Tower A's system when the sound reached him. First, a metallic groan, the kind of noise that made veteran maintenance workers stop what they're doing and listen. Then a crack like a rifle shot, amplified by concrete walls. Then the explosion. The shockwave hit him like a physical blow, dust and heat rolling through the corridor. Emergency lights flickered to life, bathing everything in red. The fire alarm started its ear-splitting wail. Marcus grabbed his toolkit and ran toward the source, his boots pounding against concrete, his heart hammering against his ribs. Tower B's mechanical room was chaos. Steam filled the air in scalding clouds, the temperature spiking 20 degrees in as many seconds. Through the vapor, Marcus could make out the ruptured pipe metal, peeled back like a flower from hellwater, and steam venting at pressure that could strip meat from bone. Two figures lay on the floor. Carlos, the janitor, who always had a smile and a kind word, was closest. His face was blistered, his left arm bent at an angle that made Marcus's stomach lurch. Beyond him, Julie from accounting was pinned under a section of shelving that had been blown off the wall. She was screaming a raw sound of pain and terror. Training took over. Marcus's hands moved without conscious thought, reaching for the main shutoff valve. The wheel was hot enough to burn through his gloves, but he cranked it anyway. Muscles straining, metal shrieking in protest. The steam flow began to decrease. Emergency protocols learned in Navy engine rooms and refreshed in quarterly training sessions played out in his muscle memory. He pulled out his phone, called 911. His voice sounded strange in his own ears, too calm, detached. Explosion at Hartfield Tower, 1142 Madison Avenue. 2 injured. Need ambulances now. Carlos wasn't moving. Marcus dropped to his knees, checked for a pulse, found one, but weak and thready. Second-degree burns covered the man's face and forearms. His breathing was shallow, rapid, the kind of shock response that preceded worse things. Julie's screams had faded to whimpers. Marcus moved to her, assessed the situation. The shelving unit was pinning her right leg, blood pooling beneath it. He found a crowbar in his toolkit, wedged it under the metal, and levered up. The woman cried out, but Marcus kept pressure steady until she could drag herself clear. Her leg was mangled bone visible through torn flesh. The stairs thundered with approaching footsteps. Emergency responders poured through the door, firefighters and paramedics, moving with practiced efficiency. Marcus stepped back, let the professionals work, watched them load Carlos and Julie onto gurneys and disappear toward the ambulances waiting at street level. A fire marshal appeared, 50-something and weathered, carrying a clipboard and wearing the expression of someone who'd seen too many preventable disasters. His eyes swept the room, cataloging damage, already building a narrative of what happened. What happened here? Marcus felt his mouth go dry. The truth was a physical weight pressing down on his chest. Pipe failure. Pressure buildup. The marshal moved closer, examining the ruptured pipe with a practiced eye. When was the last inspection? The words came out like broken glass. Yesterday. I signed off on it. The marshal's gaze swung toward him, sharp and assessing. You certified this system was safe. Marcus couldn't speak, couldn't nod, could only stand there while his world collapsed in real time. The mechanical room door opened again. Gregory Hartfield Jr. stepped through immaculate in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. He was 38 but looked younger, the kind of aging money could postpone with the right gym membership and skincare regimen. His eyes swept the damage with the detachment of someone reviewing quarterly loss projections. Terrible accident. His voice carried the practiced sympathy of corporate PR training. Equipment failure, obviously. We'll cooperate fully with your investigation, Marshal. Then his gaze found Marcus, and something cold moved behind the facade of concern. You're Marcus Chen, our lead maintenance technician. Marcus managed a nod. You signed yesterday's inspection on this system, another nod. This one heavier. Gregory turned to the marshal, his expression shifting to something appropriately grave. Our technician certified everything was safe yesterday. He gestured at the destruction around them. Obviously something was missed. The words landed like an indictment. Marcus wanted to speak to explain about the 7 previous reports about Brad's pressure to sign about the budget cuts and falsified records. But his throat had locked up, his voice trapped behind the understanding of what was happening. The marshal pulled out his own clipboard. Mr. Chen, I'll need you to come to our office tomorrow. We'll have questions about your inspection procedures. Heavy footsteps on the stairs announced new arrivals. 2 NYPD officers appeared, their presence shifting the atmosphere from accident investigation to something more serious. Gregory spoke quietly with them, his posture deferential but confident. Marcus caught fragments of the conversation. Signed inspection technician's responsibility. Terrible tragedy. One of the officers approached Marcus. His nameplate read Kowalski, his expression neutral but cautious. Mr. Chen, Detective Morris from the precinct is going to want to talk to you. Don't leave town, okay? The words should have been frightening, should have triggered panic or adrenaline. Instead, Marcus felt only a numbing sense of inevitability. He'd signed that form knowing it was false. He'd put his name on a document certifying safety when every instinct screamed danger. He'd made his choice yesterday afternoon, traded integrity for job security. Now 2 people were hurt, and he was holding the bag. Gregory Hartfield Jr. lingered after the police left, ostensibly discussing next steps with building management. But his eyes kept finding Marcus, and in them was a message clearer than any spoken words. You signed. This is on you. Keep your mouth shut, and maybe you walk away with just a suspension. Start talking about budget cuts and pressure and reports being ignored, and we'll bury you so deep they'll need archaeological equipment to find the pieces. Marcus left the mechanical room at 9:17 a.m., his shift not even half over his career. Likely finished his freedom, potentially measured in whatever time passed before someone decided this rose to criminal negligence. The elevator ride up felt like ascending through layers of a hell specifically designed for his sins. The employee exit dumped him into an alley behind the building. Garbage trucks were making their morning rounds, that city symphony of hydraulics and crushing metal. The sun was climbing toward noon, promising a day too beautiful for what it contained. His phone buzzed, a text from HR. Marcus Chen, your employment status is under review. Disciplinary hearing scheduled Friday 2 p.m. Attendance mandatory. 3 days. He had 3 days before they'd officially end him, before the machinery of corporate protection ground him into legal powder. Carlos was in a hospital somewhere fighting for his arm, maybe his life. Julie's leg was destroyed, and Marcus had signed the form that said everything was fine. He drove home in a fugue state, the truck navigating familiar streets on autopilot while his mind spun through scenarios and consequences. Ryan was at school, wouldn't be home until 3:30. The apartment felt cavernous and accusing. Jennifer's photo on the mantel seemed to stare at him with disappointment. Marcus collapsed onto the couch and stared at the ceiling. The textured surface formed patterns that looked almost like Jennifer's face if he squinted, like she was watching from whatever place came after judging his choices and finding them catastrophically wanting. His phone rang again. Unknown number. He answered anyway. The voice was female, professional, carrying an authority that transcended caller ID. Mr. Chen, this is Sarah Martinez from OSHA. I'd like to speak with you about Hartfield Tower. Sarah Martinez's voice carried the kind of steady professionalism that came from years of navigating bureaucratic minefields while keeping genuine purpose intact. Marcus pressed the phone harder against his ear as if proximity might make her words easier to process. I've been investigating Hartfield properties for 6 months. Your incident this morning fits a pattern we've been tracking. I need to speak with you in person, preferably soon. Marcus found his voice somewhere beneath the wreckage of the morning. When today, if possible? My office is downtown, but I can meet you somewhere more convenient. This isn't an interrogation, Mr. Chen. I think you might be a victim here, not a perpetrator. The word victim settled over him like ash. He gave her the address of a diner 2 blocks from his apartment, agreed to meet in an hour, and ended the call. The apartment's silence pressed in from all sides. He needed to move to think, to understand what investigating Hartfield for 6 months meant, and how it connected to his signature on a form that had preceded disaster by less than 24 hours. The diner was one of those Queens institutions that had survived 3 recessions and 4 ownership changes, still serving coffee in heavy ceramic mugs and eggs any style until 3 p.m. Marcus took a booth near the back, ordered coffee he didn't want, and waited. Sarah Martinez arrived at 11:42 a.m., recognizable from the confident stride and the leather portfolio under her arm. Late 30s Latina wearing a pantsuit that split the difference between government employee and someone who took the work seriously enough to project authority. She slid into the booth across from him, declined coffee, and opened her portfolio with the efficiency of someone who'd conducted 100 similar conversations. Mr. Chen, I'm going to be direct because I think you're smart enough to appreciate it. Gregory Hartfield. Junior has been cutting maintenance budgets across his father's property portfolio for 2 years. We've documented 3 other incidents before today, all swept under settlement agreements with non-disclosure clauses. Your explosion this morning is the first one with enough evidence and media attention that they can't make it disappear. Marcus wrapped both hands around his coffee mug, kneading the heat against his palms. The 7 reports I filed about Tower B's pipes. Did anyone ever see those? Sarah pulled out a tablet, swiped through files. I have complaint records going back 18 months, but no internal maintenance reports. Nothing with your name on it. The implications crashed over him in waves. They deleted his reports, scrubbed the paper trail, left him holding a signed inspection form with no documentation of his previous warnings. A perfect scapegoat, gift-wrapped and delivered. My husband was a firefighter. Sarah's voice shifted, losing the professional edge for something more personal. He died 4 years ago in a building collapse in Brooklyn. Faulty construction code violations the inspector missed because the developer paid him to miss them. I couldn't save David, but I can make sure other families don't get that phone call. She pulled out a business card, slid it across the table. The embossed letters spelled out her title at OSHA, a direct phone number written in pen across the back. I think you were pressured to sign that inspection. I think you raised concerns that were ignored. I think Gregory Hartfield set you up to take the fall for his cost-cutting measures. But I need you to talk to me on record about what happened. Marcus stared at the card. The math was simple and brutal. Talk to OSHA, become a whistleblower, paint a target on his back the size of Manhattan. Hartfield had lawyers' resources connections that reached into police departments and city agencies. Marcus had a checking account with less than $300 and a son who needed $400 inhalers to breathe. I need time. The words felt inadequate the moment they left his mouth. Sarah nodded, closing her portfolio. You have my number. But Mr. Chen understands something. If you don't talk, they will hang this entirely on you. And there are people in that company who've done this before who know how to make problems disappear. She left cash on the table for coffee. Neither of them had drunk and walked out. Marcus sat alone, the business card between his fingers, Jennifer's voice in his head asking what kind of man he wanted Ryan to grow up to be. The official email arrived at 2:17 p.m. clinical in its corporate speak. Marcus Chen, effective immediately, you are suspended without pay, pending investigation into safety protocol violations. Return all company property to HR by end of business today. A disciplinary hearing has been scheduled for Friday, November 17th at 2 p.m. Attendance is mandatory. Suspended without pay. The words carried weight that would flatten him if he thought about them too long. Rent was due in 5 days, $1,800 he wouldn't have. Ryan's prescription refill was Friday. The school's emergency supply wouldn't last another week. The truck needed inspection next month, registration after that. Jennifer's medical bills from her final 6 months still generated collection notices, 23,000 in debt that followed him like a ghost. Marcus spent Thursday afternoon returning his access badge and toolkit to HR, enduring the sympathetic looks from coworkers who'd already heard what happened. The news had spread through the building's maintenance staff like fire through kindling. Chen signed off on faulty equipment. 2 people hurt might face criminal charges. Nobody asked his side. Nobody wanted to risk association with someone who'd become radioactive. Friday morning brought Ryan's normal routine oblivious to the wreckage accumulating around them. Marcus made breakfast, packed lunch, walked him to the bus stop. The November cold had teeth winter, announcing its approach through wind that cut through jackets and found skin. Other parents clustered in their usual groups, conversation flowing around kid activities and weekend plans. Marcus noticed the shift immediately, the way conversations died when he approached. The subtle repositioning of bodies creating distance without making it obvious. Karen Hoskins, who chatted with him at every bus stop for 2 years, suddenly became very interested in her phone screen. Dave Martinez, whose son was Ryan's age and had been to their apartment for playdates, found urgent business across the street. The bus arrived, children piling on in that chaotic scramble of backpacks and voices. Ryan waved from his window seat, gap-toothed smile bright against the glass. Marcus waved back, feeling the weight of eyes on him, judgment settling over his shoulders like snow. Mrs. Patterson lived in the apartment below theirs, a widow in her 70s, who'd watched Ryan after school since Jennifer died. She'd been a lifeline affordable childcare. When Marcus's shift ran late, someone Ryan trusted and who treated him with grandmother affection. Marcus knocked on her door at noon, needing to discuss next week's schedule now that his work situation had changed. The door opened 4 inches, held by a chain lock that had never been engaged before. Mrs. Patterson's face appeared in the gap, her expression carrying an apology that made his stomach drop before she spoke. "Marcus, I'm sorry. I can't watch Ryan anymore." The words hit like physical blows. "What?" Why her eyes wouldn't meet his. "My daughter called. She saw the news. She thinks she's worried about judgment, about safety. I'm sorry, truly I am. But I can't." The door closed before he could respond. The lock clicked with finality. Marcus stood in the hallway, staring at wood grain, understanding that consequences came in layers and waves, each one finding new ways to dismantle the infrastructure of his life. Ryan's school called at 1:47 p.m. The principal's secretary, her voice carrying that careful neutrality that preceded difficult conversations. "Mr. Chen, Principal Davis would like to schedule a meeting with you. There have been some concerns raised by parents regarding the incident at your workplace." Marcus gripped the phone hard enough to make the plastic creak. "Concerns? Yes. Questions about judgment, about safety. I'm sure you understand the school has to be responsive to parent feedback." The translation was clear. Other parents wanted Ryan gone, wanted distance from the man whose negligence, as they understood it, had put people in the hospital. The meeting would be a formality, a chance to make it look like due process before they suggested Ryan might be more comfortable elsewhere. He hung up without scheduling anything, sat on the couch, and felt the walls closing in with geometric precision. No job, no income, no childcare, school potentially forcing Ryan out, and in the center of it all, a signed inspection form that tied him to an explosion he had tried to prevent. Ryan came home at 3:35 p.m., later than usual, walking instead of taking the bus. His backpack dragged on the ground, Spider-Man's face scuffed and dirty. He wouldn't meet Marcus's eyes. The story came out in pieces, pulled like shards of glass from a wound. Recess had been normal until Tyler Brennan, whose father worked in finance and lived in one of the new luxury buildings, had started talking loud enough for everyone to hear. About maintenance men who didn't do their jobs. About people getting hurt because workers were lazy or stupid. About how his dad said the guy responsible should go to jail. Other kids had picked it up the way children do when they sense vulnerability and pack dynamics take over. Ryan Chen's dad is bad. He hurt people. Someone had pushed him into the fence. Someone else had thrown his lunch in the trash. The playground monitor had intervened eventually, but the damage was carved into Ryan's expression, into the slump of his shoulders, into the way he'd walked home alone rather than face the bus. Marcus pulled his son close, felt the small body shake with suppressed tears. "I'm sorry, buddy. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault." But Ryan pulled back, his 8-year-old face carrying questions that felt ancient. Dad, did you do something bad? Marcus knelt, bringing himself to eye level, his hands on Ryan's shoulders. The boy's eyes were so much like Jennifer's, that same directness that demanded truth even when lies would be easier. I made a mistake. The words felt like admitting to murder. But I tried to do the right thing. Sometimes adults have to make hard choices, and sometimes those choices don't work out the way we hope. But you always say tell the truth. Don't lie. Ryan's voice cracked. You said being honest is the most important thing. The hypocrisy landed with surgical precision, cutting through every rationalization Marcus had constructed. He'd preached integrity while practicing expedience, taught courage while choosing cowardice, stood in front of his son as a moral authority while signing documents he knew were false. The words wouldn't come. Marcus held Ryan while the boy cried, feeling his own eyes burn his throat, close, his chest constrict with the understanding that he'd failed at the one job that mattered most. Not maintaining buildings or keeping pipes functional, teaching his son how to be a man worth respecting. Tommy called at 7:23 p.m. after Ryan had cried himself into exhausted sleep after Marcus had sat in the darkened living room for 2 hours watching headlights sweep across the ceiling and listening to the radiator clank its evening song. Kid, we need to talk. I found something you need to see. Tommy's apartment looked the same as always, walls covered in decades of memories, but the atmosphere had shifted. The older man's face carried an expression Marcus had never seen before, something between anger and determination and bone-deep weariness. He pulled out a cardboard box from his bedroom closet, the kind used for long-term storage, edges softened by time. Inside were maintenance reports, dozens of them dating back 2 years. Each one flagged problems at Heartfelt Properties. Faulty wiring in Tower A, cracked foundation supports in the Connecticut building, corroded pipes in Tower B. 3 separate reports with Marcus's signature at the bottom. Tommy spread them across his kitchen table like evidence at trial. This has been going on since Hartfield Jr. took over operations. He cut the maintenance budget by 40% first year. We all saw it happening. Equipment orders denied, repairs postponed, inspection schedules compressed. Marcus picked up one of the reports dated 14 months ago, Tommy's handwriting documenting electrical hazards that violated basic code. Stamped across the top in red ink, budget constraints, defer to next fiscal year. What happened to these? They were supposed to go to Leonard Hartfield Sr. His jaw tightened, but Gregory controlled operations. Had Brad intercepted anything that made his cost-cutting look bad? Most of us didn't know until we started comparing notes last year. Tommy pulled out a separate folder, this one thinner. 3 workers fired in the last 18 months. All for pushing back against safety shortcuts. All let go for performance issues that materialized after they'd raised concerns. The documentation was careful, legal, untraceable back to retaliation unless you knew where to look. I kept my mouth shut. Tommy's voice carried self-recrimination that made him sound older than his 55 years. 28 years at this company, 2 years to full pension. I couldn't risk it. Jean's medical bills from the cancer ate our savings. We're still paying off credit cards. I needed those 2 years. He sat heavily in his kitchen chair, hands flat on the table. But Carlos is 28, got a 9-month-old daughter. He might lose his arm, Marcus. And I stayed quiet because I was scared. The silence between them held weight. Marcus understood it intimately, that calculus of self-preservation versus responsibility, the way fear could dress itself up as pragmatism until you couldn't tell them apart anymore. Tommy stood, moved to his jacket hanging by the door, and pulled something from the inner pocket. A USB drive, small and black, innocuous as a candy bar. His hand trembled slightly as he held it out. Security camera footage from Tower B's mechanical room. From the night before your inspection. You need to see this. They watched it on Tommy's laptop, the screen showing grainy black and white footage, time-stamped 11:47 p.m. November 14th. The mechanical room's camera angle captured most of the space, including the pipe assembly that would rupture 16 hours later. The door opened at 11:51 p.m. Gregory Hartfield Jr. stepped through, recognizable despite the poor resolution. He moved with purpose, no hesitation, someone who'd planned this visit. His hands went to the pressure regulation valve, the one Marcus had flagged in his reports as running too hot. The footage showed Gregory adjusting the valve, turning it counterclockwise, increasing pressure in a system already stressed beyond safe parameters. He worked for 90 seconds, made small adjustments that would look like normal wear to anyone who didn't know better. Then he left, pulling the door closed behind him. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice water. Tommy had been right. This wasn't negligence or budget cuts or bureaucratic indifference. This was deliberate. Gregory had sabotaged the system, creating conditions guaranteed to fail, and he'd done it the night before Marcus signed the inspection. The implications multiplied like fractures in overstressed metal. Insurance payout claimed the building was old equipment past its lifespan, justify a full renovation at insurance company expense. Collect double pocket the difference between actual costs and claim damages. And if people got hurt in the process, well, that's what settlements and non-disclosure agreements were for. Tommy's voice was rough. He wanted the explosion, needed it to justify the insurance claim. Your signature gave him cover, made it look like a maintenance failure instead of sabotage. Marcus couldn't look away from the frozen image on screen. Gregory's face caught in profile expression, calm and focused. This was attempted murder dressed up as corporate fraud. Carlos and Julie had been acceptable collateral damage in a scheme to inflate profit margins and impress a father who judged success in quarterly returns. This evidence clears you. Tommy ejected the USB drive, pressed it into Marcus's palm. Shows you were set up, but going public means fighting the Heartfelt family, their lawyers, their resources. They've got 100 million reasons to make this disappear. Marcus closed his fist around the drive, feeling its edges bite into his palm. And I've got negative $300 in a kid who got bullied today because other parents think I'm a criminal. The older man's expression softened. So what do you do? The question hung there unanswerable. Marcus had been raised on stories about doing the right thing, about standing up to power, about integrity, mattering more than expedience. Jennifer had believed those things absolutely. She'd worked as a social worker, advocating for families caught in bureaucratic nightmares, fighting systems designed to grind people down. She died believing the world could be better if enough people refused to look away. But she'd also made him promise to take care of Ryan, to protect their son above everything else. And those two imperatives, care for Ryan and fight for justice, had just collided with the force of that exploding pipe. I don't know, the admission felt like defeat. I need time to think. Tommy nodded understanding in his weathered face. But Marcus, that investigator who died last week. Robert Caldwell. He was looking into Heartfelt properties before he supposedly killed himself. The words landed like a fist to the solar plexus. Marcus had seen the news, heard the suicide speculation, noted the timing. But having it spelled out, the connection made explicit, added a dimension of danger he hadn't fully processed. If they killed an inspector to keep him quiet. Tommy didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Marcus left 15 minutes later, the USB drive in his jacket pocket, feeling heavier than physics allowed. The November night had turned bitter wind, carrying the promise of winter in its teeth. Queens stretched out around him, millions of windows glowing with lives less complicated than his family's eating dinner and watching television and planning weekends without needing to weigh survival against conscience. His phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. Ryan, okay? Marcus froze on the sidewalk, cold seeping through his jacket. The message could mean anything. Genuine concern from a coworker. A threat disguised as care. He typed back, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then a friend who thinks you should be careful who you talk to. No signature, no follow-up. Just the implication that someone was watching, that his movements and conversations were noted, that speaking to Oshai or showing anyone that USB drive would have consequences. Marcus deleted the message and kept walking. His apartment building appeared ahead, familiar and foreign, simultaneously home and trap occupying the same space. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step an effort against gravity and accumulated damage. Ryan was still asleep, his breathing steady, one arm flung above his head in that careless sprawl of childhood. Marcus stood in the doorway watching him, this small person who depended on him absolutely, who trusted him to make decisions that kept them safe and fed and housed. The USB drive pressed against his ribs through jacket fabric. Evidence that could clear his name, expose Gregory's crimes, maybe prevent future disasters. But using it meant war with people who had resources to destroy him and a demonstrated willingness to make problems disappear permanently. He could walk away, take whatever plea deal they offered, maybe avoid jail time if his lawyer was good. Find another job, eventually rebuild slowly, keep Ryan safe by keeping quiet. It was the logical choice, the pragmatic path, the decision any reasonable person would make when faced with impossible odds. But Ryan's voice echoed in his memory, that question asked with 8-year-old directness. Did you do something bad, Dad? And worse, the follow-up that had cut deepest. You always say tell the truth. Marcus pulled out his phone and stared at Sarah Martinez's business card, her number written in confident handwriting across embossed government letterhead. His thumb hovered over the digits trapped between equally terrible choices. Call her, become a target. Stay silent, become complicit. Jennifer's face surfaced in his mind, not from photographs, but from living memory, the way she'd looked at him on their wedding day with absolute faith that he was someone worth building a life beside. What would she say about the man he'd become, about signing false documents and choosing self-preservation over other people's safety? The answer came with painful clarity. She'd be disappointed. Not angry, Jennifer had rarely gotten angry, but disappointed in ways that hurt worse than rage, her quiet assessment that he'd failed to be the person she'd believed him to be. His phone buzzed again, different number this time. Marcus almost didn't answer, exhausted by complications and implications in the weight of decisions that shouldn't fall on one person's shoulders. But something made him swipe green, lift the device to his ear. Mr. Chen. The voice was male, older, carrying authority tempered by something that might have been sympathy. This is Leonard Hartfield. I think we need to talk about my son. The words froze Marcus in place. Leonard Hartfield, senior CEO and founder of Hartfield Properties, the man whose business empire his son was corrupting for profit margins. Why would he be calling at 9:34 p.m. on a Friday night? I'm listening. Marcus managed to keep his voice steady. Not on the phone. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. my office. Come alone. And Mr. Chen, bring whatever evidence you have. It's time this ended. The line went dead. Marcus stood in his darkened apartment, phone in one hand, USB drive in his pocket, Ryan sleeping innocently down the hall. The walls seemed to press closer, the city's 8 million souls moving through their lives, while his balanced on the edge of choices that would define everything that came after. He had 16 hours until that meeting. 16 hours to decide if Leonard Hartfield's summons was a genuine offer or an elaborate trap. 16 hours to weigh Tommy's evidence against anonymous threats. Sarah Martinez's investigation against his own survival integrity, against pragmatism. Outside his window, Queens glittered in the November darkness, lights stretching toward horizons he couldn't see. Somewhere in one of those glowing windows, Carlos was recovering from burns that might cost him his livelihood. Julie was learning to walk on a leg that would never be the same. And Gregory Hartfield Jr. was probably sleeping soundly, confident that money and lawyers and the right connections would protect him from consequences the way they always had. Marcus made coffee he didn't want, sat at the kitchen table where he'd eaten 1,000 meals with Jennifer, where Ryan did homework and drew pictures of superheroes who always won. The USB drive lay between his hands, black plastic containing evidence that could change everything or end everything, depending on who controlled the narrative. His phone sat silent now. No more mysterious texts or unexpected calls, just the weight of tomorrow pressing down on tonight, decisions accumulating like snow before an avalanche. At some point, Marcus knew the weight would become too much. The question was whether he'd still be standing when it finally broke. Saturday morning arrived wrapped in fog, the kind that turned Queens into something ghostly and unfamiliar. Marcus had slept maybe 90 minutes, total fragments of unconsciousness, interrupted by scenarios spinning through his mind like film reels stuck on repeat. Ryan stirred at 7, padding into the kitchen in dinosaur pajamas, his hair sticking up at angles that would have made Jennifer laugh. Marcus made pancakes from a mix, the routine motions providing something to focus on besides the meeting scheduled for 3 hours from now. Ryan ate with the single-minded concentration of children, drowning each bite in syrup, oblivious to the way his father's hands trembled slightly when pouring milk. The USB drive sat on top of the refrigerator where Ryan couldn't reach it, a small black rectangle that contained the power to either save Marcus or paint an even larger target on his back. Leonard Hartfield's invitation felt less like an opportunity and more like stepping into a cage, but the alternative was waiting for the disciplinary hearing Monday, while Gregory's lawyers built an ironclad case for Marcus's sole culpability. Mrs. Chen from 3 doors down agreed to watch Ryan, her expression neutral, but her eyes carrying judgment she was too polite to voice. Marcus kissed his son goodbye, felt small arms wrap around his neck with fierce trust, and walked out into November cold that it seemed designed to leach warmth from human bones. The subway ride into Manhattan gave him 40 minutes to second-guess every decision that had led here. Hartfield Properties occupied floors 37 through 40 in a midtown tower that screamed wealth in architectural language. Marcus had never been to the executive offices, had existed in the basement world of mechanical rooms and service corridors, the invisible infrastructure that kept buildings functional while the people above forgot his kind existed. Security in the lobby was tighter than he expected. Two guards' metal detectors, sign-in procedures that felt more appropriate for a military installation than commercial real estate. Marcus gave his name to a woman whose makeup probably cost more than his monthly grocery budget. She made a call, raised perfectly sculpted eyebrows, and directed him to elevator bank key. Floor 37 opened onto reception that belonged in design magazines, all chrome and marble, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of a city Marcus barely recognized from this height. The receptionist was expecting him, led him down hallways where art that might be original hung on walls painted in shades that probably had names like Thoughtful Gray or Executive Beige. Leonard Hartfield's office occupied a corner suite with windows on two sides Manhattan, spreading out below like a three-dimensional map of ambition and commerce. The man himself stood at those windows, 67 years old, but carrying himself with the rigid posture of someone who'd built an empire through force of will. He turned when Marcus entered, his face carved by decades of boardroom battles into something that revealed nothing unintentionally. "Mr. Chen." His voice matched his appearance, controlled and precise. "Thank you for coming. Sit." The chairs were leather, the kind that probably cost what Marcus made in a month. He sat. Leonard remained standing, hands clasped behind his back, studying Marcus with the same intensity he likely brought to quarterly reports and acquisition proposals. "My son is destroying everything I built." The words came out flat, statement of fact rather than emotional confession. 30 years of work reputation built on quality and safety, and Gregory thinks profit margins matter more than integrity. Marcus said nothing, waiting the USB drive in his jacket pocket, feeling radioactive. "I know what he did." Leonard moved from the window, finally sitting in the chair across from Marcus rather than behind the massive desk that dominated the room. "The pressure valve in Tower B. I've seen the security footage." The admission hung between them. Marcus recalculated everything he'd assumed about this meeting. If Leonard already had evidence, then why summon Marcus? What purpose did this serve beyond maybe gauging how much Marcus knew, who he'd talked to, what kind of threat he represented? "Then you know I didn't cause that explosion." Marcus kept his voice level. "You know your son set me up." Leonard's expression didn't change. "I know Gregory has been cutting corners, falsifying reports, pressuring employees to compromise safety standards. I know he's turned my company into the kind of operation I spent decades avoiding becoming. But you're his father." The words came out sharper than Marcus intended. "You protected him." Something flickered across Leonard's face, gone too quickly to identify. "A father's loyalty has limits, Mr. Chen." Gregory crossed them when he put people in the hospital to pad his profit projections. He stood, moved to his desk, and pulled out a folder thick with documents. Inside were financial records, emails, maintenance reports that had supposedly been deleted. Everything needed to prove systematic fraud, budget manipulation, and deliberate endangerment. Leonard spread them out with the precision of someone presenting evidence. "I've been building this case for 3 months. Since the incident in our Connecticut property where a woman broke her leg when a stairwell railing gave way. Gregory settled quickly, made her sign an NDA, and I started wondering what else he'd hidden." Marcus stared at the documents, understanding crystallizing. "This isn't about justice. This is about controlling the narrative before it destroys your company." Leonard met his gaze without flinching. "My company employs 400 people, Mr. Chen. Good people, most of them. If this scandal break is wrong, if Gregory's crimes get tied to Hartfield Properties rather than to one executive acting independently, we'll be destroyed in litigation. Those 400 people lose their jobs. Their families suffer. So you want me to help you throw your son under the bus while keeping the company clean?" Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. "What do I get out of this arrangement? Your name cleared. Full salary restoration with back pay. A reference that will open doors. And the satisfaction of knowing Gregory faces consequences instead of buying his way out like he always has." The offer was generous, probably more than Marcus could hope to extract through any other channel. But the mechanics of it felt dirty, less like justice and more like damage control disguised as accountability. Leonard wasn't doing this because it was right. He was doing it because the alternative would cost him more. I need time to think. Marcus stood the chair scraping against marble floor. And I need to talk to someone else first. Leonard's jaw tightened fractionally. The OSHA investigator, Sarah Martinez. His research had clearly been thorough. Be careful there, Mr. Chen. Federal investigations have ways of expanding beyond their original scope. You could end up as collateral damage. Or I could end up with real justice instead of a curated version designed to protect corporate assets. Marcus moved toward the door. I'll be in touch. He didn't wait for dismissal, just walked out past the receptionists, surprised into the elevator that descended too slowly, his mind racing through implications and calculations. Leonard Hartfield had just offered him everything he'd lost wrapped in a package that felt increasingly like compromise dressed as pragmatism. The street level hit him with noise, and movement humanity compressed into Manhattan density. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed the number on Sarah Martinez's business card before he could talk himself out of it. She answered on the second ring. I need to meet. Today. And I have evidence you need to see. Sarah's office occupied a corner of a federal building in Lower Manhattan, the kind of institutional space that proclaimed government efficiency while looking like it hadn't been updated since the Reagan administration. She met him in the lobby, led him through security protocols that made Hartfield Properties look casual, up to the 7th floor where OSHA carved out territory among other agencies tasked with protecting people from the consequences of unchecked capitalism. Her actual office was small walls covered in file folders and case documentation, a window that offered views of other buildings in that uniquely New York way where privacy was achieved through proximity. Marcus sat in a chair that had seen decades of use, the USB drive finally leaving his pocket. Sarah plugged it into her laptop without comment, pulled up the video file and watched in silence as Gregory Hartfield adjusted that pressure valve with the casual confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. When it finished, she replayed it twice more, her expression shifting from professional interest to something harder. This is deliberate sabotage. Her voice carried the weight of someone who just had their worst suspicions confirmed. With your testimony, this becomes a criminal case, not just civil penalties. Prison time. Marcus explained Leonard's offer, the documents, the carefully constructed narrative that would sacrifice Gregory while protecting the company. Sarah listened with the attention of someone trained to hear what wasn't being said as loudly as what was. He's not wrong about one thing. She leaned back, fingers steepled. A scandal that destroys Hartfield Properties hurts a lot of innocent people. But letting Leonard control the story means he decides how much truth gets told and how much stays buried. What would you do? Sarah's expression shifted, something personal. Breaking through professional composure. My husband died because a developer cut corners and an inspector took bribes. The official report said equipment failure, acts of God language that protected everyone except the families of the 3 firefighters who died that day. She met Marcus's gaze directly. I'd want the whole truth told no matter who it hurt, because the alternative is that it happens again. Marcus felt the weight of competing imperatives crushing down. Ryan needed stability, needed his father employed and present rather than trapped in legal battles that could drag on for years. 400 Hartfield employees needed their jobs, needed to avoid being collateral damage in Gregory's crimes. But Carlos needed his arm to heal properly, needed to know someone was held accountable. Julie needed physical therapy that would take months, needed justice that went beyond settlement checks. I have a disciplinary hearing Monday. If I don't show, they'll fire me for cause. No unemployment, no reference, nothing. Marcus heard the defeat in his own voice. I can't afford to be unemployed right now. Then you show up and you tell the truth. Sarah's voice carried conviction that made it sound simple. You explain the pressure to sign the deleted reports, the pattern of negligence. And when they try to fire you anyway, we have grounds for wrongful termination retaliation against a whistleblower. Federal protections kick in. And if those protections don't keep my lights on or pay for my son's medication, the question hung there unanswerable because they both knew how these situations played out. Whistleblowers lost jobs, burned bridges, faced years of legal limbo while their lives fell apart around them. The law protected them in theory. In practice, theory and reality occupied different zip codes. Sarah pulled out a business card different from her official one and wrote a phone number on the back. My lawyer, David Chang, specializes in whistleblower cases, works pro bono when he believes in the cause. Call him Monday morning, explain everything. He'll make sure you're protected legally even if Hartfield tries to bury you financially. Marcus took the card, added it to the collection growing in his wallet. His life was becoming a catalog of people offering help that might not be enough legal protections, that might not matter when the rent came due. There's something else you should know. Sarah's expression hardened. Gregory Hartfield Jr.'s uncle is Deputy Commissioner Wilson at NYPD. His college roommate is a federal prosecutor. His father-in-law sits on the state legislature's budget committee. You're not just fighting one person, Mr. Chen. You're fighting a network designed to protect its own. The information landed with the weight Marcus should have anticipated. Of course, Gregory had connections. Of course, the system was rigged to protect people like him. That was how the world worked, how it had always worked, money and power creating invisible shields that deflected consequences onto those who couldn't afford lawyers and fixers. He left Sarah's office an hour later, his head full of legal strategy and worst-case scenarios. The subway back to Queens gave him time to process, to understand that every path forward led through different versions of pain. Tell the truth, face retaliation. Stay silent, become complicit. Accept Leonard's offer, sell out for comfort, disguised as pragmatism. Ryan was waiting when Marcus got home, sprawled on the couch watching cartoons with Mrs. Chen knitting in the nearby chair. Marcus thanked her, paid the $20 he couldn't afford, and closed the door behind her. Ryan bounded over, full of 8-year-old energy despite yesterday's bullying. Dad, can we go to the park? It's not too cold. Marcus looked at his son, at the gap-toothed smile and dinosaur shirt, in complete faith that his father would make everything okay. Jennifer's voice whispered from memory, that last conversation in the hospital when the morphine had finally taken the edge off the pain. Promise me something, Marcus. Don't let the world make you small. Don't let them convince you that surviving is the same as living. He'd promised, held her hand, and sworn he'd be the kind of man their son could be proud of, the kind who stood up even when standing up cost everything. But that was before medical bills and single parenting and the grinding reality of trying to maintain integrity while keeping a child fed and housed. They went to the park. Marcus pushed Ryan on the swings, the boys' laughter cutting through November cold like something too pure for the world to contain. Other families occupied the playground. Parents clustered in conversation while children navigated social hierarchies through games that looked chaotic, but followed rules adults had forgotten. Karen Hoskins was there with her daughter, stationed deliberately on the far side of the play structure. She made eye contact once, quickly looked away, and moved to gather her child despite protests that they'd just arrived. Marcus watched them leave, understanding spreading like cold water that his presence had become something other parents wanted distance from. Ryan noticed his attention shifting from the slide he'd been climbing. Why did Emma have to leave? Maybe they had somewhere else to be. The lie felt transparent even as Marcus spoke it. His phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number again, but a different one from yesterday's anonymous warning. The message was short, precise, and carried threat in every syllable. Talking to federal investigators is a mistake. Some problems have permanent solutions. Marcus deleted it immediately, but the words had already burned into memory. This wasn't corporate intimidation anymore. This was something darker, a promise wrapped in implication. Robert Caldwell had been investigating Hartfield. Robert Caldwell was dead. The connection wasn't subtle. They left the park 20 minutes later, Ryan chattering about school projects and upcoming holidays, while Marcus scanned faces in the crowd looking for surveillance that might or might not be there. Paranoia and reasonable caution occupied the same mental space, indistinguishable from each other, when the stakes climbed high enough. Home felt safer but not safe, the apartment's walls providing physical barriers that wouldn't stop determined people with resources and motivation. Marcus made dinner while Ryan did homework at the kitchen table, the normalcy of the routine feeling fragile as spun glass. His phone rang at 7:15 p.m. Tommy's number lit up at the screen, but the voice that answered when Marcus picked up wasn't Tommy's. Mr. Chen. The voice was male, unfamiliar, carrying the flat affect of someone delivering information without emotional investment. Mr. O'Brien wanted you to know he's had an accident. Fell down the stairs at his building. He's at Elmhurst Hospital stable, but asking for you. The line went dead before Marcus could respond. His hands went cold, the implications cascading. Tommy had been careful, had kept his evidence collection quiet, had survived 28 years in the industry by knowing when to duck. Now he was in the hospital after a convenient accident that happened within 24 hours of their conversation about Gregory's sabotage. Marcus called the hospital, navigated through automated menus until reaching a human. Yes, Thomas O'Brien had been admitted. Visiting hours ended at 8, family only. Marcus lied reflexively, claimed to be Tommy's nephew, got a room number and directions. Mrs. Chen agreed to watch Ryan again, her expression suggesting this was becoming a pattern she disapproved of. Marcus promised 2 hours maximum, kissed Ryan goodbye, and drove through streets that seemed darker than usual, despite working streetlights. Elmhurst Hospital radiated that particular fluorescent misery, unique to medical facilities. Artificial brightness, doing nothing to dispel the heaviness that accumulated where people confronted mortality in sterile rooms. Marcus found Tommy's room on the 3rd floor, stepped through the door, and felt his stomach drop. Tommy looked decades older than he had yesterday, his face bruised purple and yellow, left arm in a cast, bandages visible through his hospital gown. But his eyes were sharp when they found Marcus, recognition and warning flashing simultaneously. Marcus moved closer, keeping his voice low. What happened? Tommy's response came rough, his throat clearly damaged. Stairs. Lost my footing. He held Marcus's gaze significantly. All that evidence in the box just gone. Fire in my apartment started while I was here. Electrical fault, they're saying. The message was clear as a billboard. This wasn't an accident. This was consequence, demonstration of reach and willingness to escalate. Tommy had kept records for 2 years, documentation that could prove systematic fraud. Now those records were ash, and Tommy was in a hospital bed with injuries that might or might not have come from falling. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, hot and clean. You need to file a police report. Tell them what really happened. Tommy's expression shifted to something between pity and frustration. Kid, the police commissioner's son, works for Hartfield. You think a report goes anywhere except straight to Gregory? He shifted in bed, wincing. You need to be smart about this. These people play for keeps. The door opened. A nurse entered, young and efficient, carrying medication, and that professional, smile healthcare workers deployed to maintain boundaries. She checked Tommy's vitals, adjusted his IV, and made notes on a tablet. Marcus waited, watched her leave, counted to 30 before speaking again. The USB drive. You gave me a copy. Do you have the original? Tommy shook his head fractionally. That was the original. I'm guessing your copy is the only evidence left that Gregory sabotaged that valve. The weight of that settled over Marcus like snow before an avalanche. One USB drive stood between Gregory facing consequences and Marcus becoming the permanent scapegoat. And now people who'd already put one man in the hospital were demonstrating their willingness to destroy evidence and anyone who held it. Marcus stayed another 20 minutes until Tommy's pain medication kicked in and sleep pulled him under. Walking out through antiseptic corridors, past rooms where other people faced their own crises, Marcus understood with perfect clarity that the situation had evolved beyond workplace drama or civil litigation. This was survival. His Tommy's, possibly Carlos's and Julie's, if they decided to speak out about what really happened. The parking lot felt exposed, every shadow potentially concealing observation. Marcus drove home through streets that had transformed from familiar to threatening, every car behind him a possible tail, every headlight a potential danger. Ryan was asleep on Mrs. Chen's couch when he arrived, the old woman's disapproval now mixed with something that might have been concern. Marcus carried his son upstairs, tucked him into bed, with the gentleness reserved for the only thing in the world that mattered unconditionally. Ryan's face in sleep looked so much like Jennifer's, that same peaceful expression that suggested the world was fundamentally good and people fundamentally decent. The USB drive was still where Marcus had left it, on top of the refrigerator, in a spot Ryan couldn't reach. He retrieved it, held it up to the light, this small piece of plastic that contained the power to bring down a corporation or get him killed depending on how he played the next 72 hours. His phone buzzed one final time. Sarah Martinez, her message brief and urgent. Need to talk, tomorrow morning, my office. Something broke in the Caldwell case. Marcus set the phone down, made coffee he wouldn't drink, and sat at the kitchen table where he'd eaten 1,000 meals with Jennifer, where Ryan drew pictures of superheroes who always won their battles. The USB drive sat between his hands, evidence and target simultaneously, salvation and curse. Outside his window, Queens settled into its Saturday night rhythm. Millions of people moving through lives that didn't require impossible choices between principles and survival. Marcus envied them with an intensity that felt physical, wished he could return to the version of himself who'd signed that inspection form, thinking it was the worst choice he'd have to make. But that version of Marcus Chen was gone, burned away in an explosion that had started as Gregory's greed and become a crucible that would either forge something stronger or reduce him to ash. The only question left was whether he'd have the courage to walk into the fire willingly, or if survival instinct would drive him to accept Leonard's offer and learn to live with compromise that tasted like ashes. Jennifer's photo watched from the mantel, her smile frozen in a moment before cancer and death, and the brutal education that came from losing everything that mattered, except the one thing you couldn't afford to lose. Marcus met her eyes across years and distance and whatever separated the living from the dead. Some things you can't walk away from. His voice was barely a whisper in the empty apartment. Some choices define you more than success or comfort ever could. The response came not in words, but in certainty, the kind of clarity that feels like grace or madness, depending on the outcome. Marcus opened his laptop, logged into a cloud storage service, and uploaded the security footage. Backup in case something happened to the drive, in case Gregory's people found him before Monday's hearing, in case survival required leverage that couldn't be destroyed in mysterious fires or convenient accidents. The upload bar crawled toward completion, while Marcus sat in the blue glow of the screen, making peace with decisions that would ripple outward in ways he couldn't predict or control. By the time the file finished uploading, by the time he'd created passwords and access protocols, and sent encrypted links to both Sarah and Tommy's personal email, dawn was breaking over Queens in shades of gray and gold. Ryan would wake in 2 hours. Marcus would make breakfast, maintain normalcy, prepare his son for a Monday that might change everything or nothing depending on which way the wind blew. But first, he allowed himself this moment, this quiet space between the life he'd known and whatever came next. The sunrise painted his apartment walls amber and rose light, pushing back darkness in the eternal rotation that promised nothing except another day to face whatever waited. Marcus watched it come, the USB drive now backed up and distributed, his choices narrowed to a single path that led forward into uncertainty with only integrity as a compass. Jennifer would approve. That knowledge settled in his chest like warmth against winter, cold, giving him strength for the battles ahead and the price they'd demand. Ryan would understand someday, would recognize the moment his father chose courage over comfort and made peace with consequences. The city woke around him, millions of Saturday mornings, beginning in apartments and houses across 5 boroughs, each one carrying its own weight of hope and fear and the daily calculus of how to survive in a world that cared more about profit than people. Marcus was just one man in that vast machinery, insignificant by any objective measure. But even one voice speaking truth loud enough could change trajectories, could hold power accountable, could make the cost of corruption exceed its profits. That faith, perhaps naive but essential, was all he had left to believe in. That and a child sleeping peacefully down the hall, dreaming of superheroes and justice and fathers who kept their promises no matter what monsters waited in the dark.